We are live.
Oh. Greetings and welcome to another Educator Innovator Hangout on Air. It is Thursday, September 24th, and today we have the opportunity to explore some debates within the techquity conversation in more detail. I'm your host, Joe Dillon, and I'm a teacher consultant with the Denver Writing Project, as well as an educational technology coordinator in the Aurora Public Schools. Our guests today come to our topic with a range of experience and expertise. But what they hold in common is an interest in issues of equity and a desire to think critically about the use of digital tools in learning spaces like, of course, classrooms. So today our guests are Nicole Mira, Al Elliott, Raymond Holden, and Chris Rogers. So I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. Let's see, if you guys don't mind, maybe we'll start with Nicole.
Sure, thanks, Joe. Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Mira. I am a former high school English teacher in New York and Los Angeles, and I'm currently an assistant professor of English education at the University of Texas at El Paso, where I focus on critical literacy, digital media, and civic engagement. And I'm happy to be here.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I'm Al Elliott. I'm a fifth grade educator at Green Valley Elementary in Hoover, Alabama. I'm a technology enthusiast and just an overall nice guy.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Rogers. I'm in Philadelphia, born and raised in Chester, Pennsylvania, and I am a tech coordinator and newly donned 8th grade language arts teacher, and a lot of community sort of like educational work as well. And happy to be here and discuss.
And my name is Raymond Holden. I'm a former middle school math and high school social studies teacher in New York City, and I'm now an assistant professor of information and learning technologies at the University of Colorado in Denver, where I focus on mobile learning and teacher professional development.
Joe, you're on mute.
That was the first time. Will it be the last? Thanks, Chris. So one more thing before we get started. If you're watching this Hangout from the Educator Innovator blog page, we encourage you to jump into the chat room to converse with others who are watching. We'll be posting links to the resources throughout the webinar. Okay, so I always like reading those intros because I like to sound really scripted and laconic, if at all possible. So I think I achieved the goal. Let's see. So tonight, you know, what we've got is we want to have a free-flowing discussion, but the discussion is going to center around a post that was written a while back by Audrey Watters, who's an education blogger, and she writes a lot about ed tech and does a lot of critical thinking in her blog about, you know, equity and the decisions schools make about excuse me, about digital tools. And what she did was she proposed for the last ISTE conference, she proposed a talk with a colleague of hers, basically arguing that it's time for schools to give up computers. So, and I think she says in the post that they'd even proposed this a couple different times, and then they were finally accepted to give the talk, right? And so, in the blog Hack Education, she posted the notes for her talk, and the thing, as I was reading it, it was, again, I have the date on it. It's what, June 29th, I think. As I was reading it, I was just noticing how a lot of the claims, yeah, they were built to get a rise out of the ISTE audience for sure, which a lot of times it can be very, you know, obviously a group of technophiles, but sometimes just sort of unabashed champions of technology, and sometimes, you know, they've drinking the Kool-Aid to the extreme, and they've spilled the Kool-Aid down their shirts, and it's now seeping into their shoes at these conferences about technology's ability to sort of raise us all out of, you know, the place we are in public ed. But as I was reading Audrey's post, I was surprised how many of her claims kind of got back to equity. So that's why this conversation, and so I appreciate again everybody joining me here today. And what I did, and hopefully it doesn't end up being too doesn't end up being too stilted of a conversation, but I want to just share out some of those claims that I thought were controversial and just hear what everyone has to say about them. And then, in the spirit of Peter Elbow's believing and doubting, we don't need to get into what we don't need to get deeply into Peter Elbow's believing and doubting, but it's a protocol that you can use with students to get them to think about both sides of the feedback they might have been given in response to their writing, or if they're reading an opinion piece and they encounter an opinion they agree with, then you force them to think about what do you disagree with in the opinion, or where are the flaws in that opinion. So the idea of thinking around both sides of an argument is basically what we're going to try and do. So for each claim that I share, what I want to do is just try to see if the panel can identify some sort of truths on both sides. So with that said, let's see if I can screen share the first one. That might be my big tech hurdle for the night. I'm going to try and screen share this so you guys can see it and it shows up for our viewers. And then I'm just going to listen to you guys talk for a little while, and if we've represented both sides, then we'll move on. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good.
Right on.
Right on.
So if you're looking at number one, are you looking at number one?
We're looking at the folder for number one.
What? That's no good.
Oh, folder got big. Oh.
So let me read it to you so you can start discussing, and I'll find another fabulous way to do this. So the first claim is computers serve to enhance the bureaucracy of schooling and the efficiency of testing.
Okay. What did it say about bureaucracy? It wanted to do what with bureaucracy?
The computers enhance the bureaucracy of schooling. And that they basically, and the efficiency of testing.
Okay. Efficiency of testing. So the pros, right? I use technology for assessment sometimes, and if it's multiple choice based responses, then you can find several ways to grade it. And even if it's not, if it's short answer, it's still I think it's an acceptable way. If you're using Google Classroom or Google Documents, you can kind of read it. You can read the kids' responses. You can give them feedback. So I think that is a way to streamline assessments. And as far as bureaucracy, I think that is like with technology and rollout. There's a nuance to the culture of using technology. There's nuance to culture in any setting. So I think a lot of times the goal is to get a device in everybody's hands, and sometimes the red tape behind getting the device in everybody's hand, and I guess the method by which you ensure those devices are going to be used in the most effective way sometimes get lost in the bureaucracy. Like the goal was to get the technology out, and now the technology's out, and everybody has it. And so let's make sure that we use them, but how to use them in the most effective way sometimes I think is not it's not shored up yet. But that's kind of, I don't know if I was for or against it, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking on that first topic.
So I'm thinking about the question, the efficiency of testing. Yes, computers are much better if tests are sort of like keys to the algorithmic thinking that we measure students on. Computers can do that much better than humans can. So yes, computers will make testing more efficient. It then becomes the question of, do we believe that in algorithmic thinking, and how much of necessity of that ideology, and where does that lead? In terms of bureaucracy, when I think of computers, and this might be where she was going, we talk about like the dashboard. Every CEO's dream or cabinet's dream is to have the dashboard, which shows all these measurements that are always working at any point in time to be able to measure. And that is one of the goals of educational technology and innovation right now is how do we make a dashboard of the school. So I mean, and that's directly tied not to teachers, but it's directly tied to administrators and district level like looks. So yes, I do believe that computers enhance bureaucracy and serve to make testing more efficient. Yes.
I mean, whether or not we choose to agree with this statement, which is a lovely claim, it's missing the word learning, which some people, of course, are, loath to throw out. It's amorphous. How do you measure it? What does it really mean? But we know that schooling is not learning, and we certainly know that there are many ways in which we can assess learning, whether in formal or less formal ways. And so, sure, computers can, enhance the bureaucracy of schooling, and they can make testing more efficient. That's not necessarily antithetical to alternatively either using computers or other technology to support learning, whether that's learning for students or teachers. So the statement might be true, but it's not definitive.
Yeah, and just as a last word, I agree with what everyone's saying. When I think of the bureaucracy of technology, I think about the school districts that I've worked in that have spent a lot more time labeling computers with ID numbers, assigning them to students, going through weeks-long processes of rolling them out to schools, and going through parent permission forms, everything you can imagine around the logistics of getting technology into people's hands. But like Remy is saying, not really speaking about what we're supposed to do with them once we actually have them in our hands in the classrooms. That's where I think the bureaucracy comes from. There's not been a lot of sustained professional development in districts around the country around what to actually do to strengthen pedagogy and offer more transformative experiences through technology. A lot of what they have been used for is simply to aid in the efficient implementation of standardized testing that's now being done online as opposed to on paper. And I think it's a problem if the extent to which we think about how to use technology is simply as another way to either give students textbooks or give students tests. Because as I've thought about before, if we always talk about the value added of teachers in the classroom, but we need to think a little bit more about what the value added is of technology. And if it's not adding something unique and transformative, then I would agree with Audrey that at that point they become tools that simply replicate the structure as it is, and that's a problem.
Let me just jump in and ask a question, because you mentioned like professional development, and I've also I've just kind of wondered personally, what is the best way of professionally developing, teachers, like current teachers, and also new teachers? Like, what should college students that are in education, what should they be taught before they enter into a classroom and are handed a phone or an iPad or a Chromebook or what have you? And I think a lot of times the professional development, just the current rollout of professional development is always behind whatever is happening, right? Because they have to develop a way to roll it out. And so just almost, I guess, a different type of educator mindset to be a technophile has its advantages, right? Like if you use technology in your personal life and it benefits you in completing certain tasks, then it's easier to figure out ways to implement it. Because I know a lot of teachers bring in a lot of personal things outside of technology. Like there have been certain things that I just thought were cool that I just brought to class. I think technology kind of finds its way in the classroom in a similar way. So just, I guess, professional development, I think if we're using technology, should look more like ways that innovative teachers are able to spread their good ideas as opposed to waiting for the same person that gave you the laptop tell you how to use it. But I don't even know if that addresses the question directly, but that's what it kind of made me think when you start mentioning professional development.
I think you're right on. I think Al, what I was just, as you were saying it, is like there's a difference between technology and automation. And when we talk about the efficiencies of testing and the enhancing of bureaucracy, it's less about sort of like technology and learning. To me, that it's more talking about the automation process. and how we can begin to sort of, put all these different layers and these automatic layers and have more access to the tools. But it's not about the process of learning, So for me, when I think about like what I want people to understand is more technology people need to understand, and I'm just thinking from like, the little tech conferences and stuff I go to be on the conversation of what does learning look like instead of where does technology fit into it, because I haven't heard that, like the depth of learning and how beautiful and messy and directions and purpose and like I don't know, man. It's kind of hard for me to get there without asking like what is the purpose of education. So, but sometimes that goes a little bit too high. But I don't know. I'm rambling now.
No, I appreciated your ramble, Chris, and I think I'm going to move us on to the next claim. But I do think we heard kind of two sides of that issue. I think we heard that technology, yes, it does enhance bureaucracy and testing. I think Chris's point about the CEO who wants the data dashboard and to be able to look at all the analytics and analyze things for themselves, right? I've noticed classrooms, schools, school leaders being very desirous of spreadsheets, right? If I put a classroom set of tools in the classroom, I want spreadsheets back, right? And I think that, we know that could be one view of this, and then I think what Al just said helps me see the other side, which is, if I want to push devices into classrooms, then how about, engaging these creative professionals who are working with youth to be thinking about what's cool, what might inspire learning, and what might we do on Monday that will sort of like shake things up for these kids or invite their critical thinking. Those I think are the two sides I heard. Hope I'm not doing too much editorial license. Speaking of cool things with technology, I'm going to try and screen share the next question again and see if that works, or the next claim. So here we go. And this one's a mouthful, actually. Are you seeing it?
Yep.
Right on. Okay, so then the claim is, so sure, there are subversive features of the computer, but the computer's features also involve widespread surveillance and, for many students, a more efficient school-to-prison pipeline. Despite our talk about meritocracy, it's a racially segregated, class-based system of education, one that technology as easily entrenches as subverts. Discuss.
I spoke first last time, so I'm gonna let somebody else tackle this first one because this is, yeah.
Yeah, I would say in terms of what I agree with about this statement, I definitely agree that computers are tools. As much as we have some magical thinking about technology sometimes, it is simply a tool, and therefore it can be used to re-entrench inequalities just as much as it can be used to subvert them. There's nothing inherent about the computer that equalizes or creates equity. That's something that people have to do with the technology. So I agree with the statement that there are many issues that come with data mining, with privacy, with giving some students access to very consumer-driven models of skills and drills kind of technology, while other students get the chance to create, and that those opportunities too often go along class and race lines. So I completely agree with the statement in those ways. But in terms of what I would try to say to kind of speak back to the kind of negative, fatalistic kind of opinion that's coming through here, is that there is hope because of the fact that we are the ones, the teachers and the learners and the students are the ones that have the ability to do something different and to speak back to dominant narratives. And that's one of the beauties of the social media world, is that tools that can be used to reinforce inequality can also be used to tear it down. And we've got a better system than ever before in Twitter of being able to immediately speak back to issues of power and privilege through uses of things as simple as hashtags. So I feel like remembering that computers are a tool to be used in the way that we want to use them can help to disrupt this cycle a little bit.
I would agree with everything that Nicole just mentioned, there's no question that any kind of tool, certainly ones that are as powerful and designed with the kinds of algorithms that computers have these days, reinforces systemic inequalities, oppression, and hierarchy, as is noted in this quote. What I find, though, is that the quote speaks to the tool and some aspects of its use, and as a way to push back a little bit on this article by Audrey Watters, and she's written about this elsewhere, so this is not a critique of her writing generally, but this particular piece that we're discussing tonight doesn't speak at length about the role of educators to design their own use of particular tools, or to design their own learning, or to design their own co-inquiry with their students. And I think that this is where tools like computers can be, as Nicole was saying, part of a broader toolkit that can work towards greater equity, or can work towards greater participation, or expression, or creativity. And so certainly the somewhat fatalistic but very realistic view of this quote, I think, can again be tempered by a more proactive and, I would say, aspirational focus on the role of design in learning. Again, whether that's designing learning for educators in their own professional learning, or designing learning with students, whether it's in or out of school.
Okay, well, I guess I'm gonna jump in. So as far as data mining, it sort of reminded me of, I guess, the whole fable of the three blind men that went up to visit the zoo, and they met an elephant, and they went back and described the elephant. And one of them described it because of the trunk, one of them described it because of his legs, and one of them described it because of his body. Okay, so they're already mining our data. And if I don't learn how to use a tool to enter some data about me, all they know is that I'm an impoverished kid from a certain side of the road, and my test scores are such and such. So to me, it's a way of using like fear tactics to make sure that a group of people that already have a marginalized voice stay marginalized. And I think instead of thinking of it as, well, we need to be careful of all the data they're getting, we need to make sure that our young people learn how to use these tools to help paint a more well-rounded picture of the elephant, and not just the trunk or the side or the leg. So that's kind of the way I think is missing when we only talk about the bad that the data mining can do. They're mining the data already, right? They're mining it. They're making predictions. If you want to talk about the prison pipeline from schools, only talk about a child's test results and let that be the only data that's entered about that child. Now, if this child is able to create, let's say they're able to create digital stories, or they're able to tell their story through movies or pictures or drawings, or they're able to converse with people around the world, and so they're being heard and their voice is being heard in a different way, in a different medium than just the test score, then I think it helps give the world something else to balance off what it is they think of, whoever is using the technologies.
So it's kind of hard for me to not agree with this statement, and but if I had anything to sort of say, doubts, and I think this is pretty much the entire piece that Audrey is right. It's not about the technology. It's about the human ideology that we bring to it, and that we manipulate through the tools that we create. And in a market system, is there a way to be able to counteract that at such a structural scale, and not just always be in the fight? So when we talk about the sort of like the school to prison pipeline, I'm always reminded that in a sense it's never been about the test score. It's never been about the it's never the measurement. I'm not sure is what's driving that piece, but the people, the bodies, I think is really important when we think about the communities and we think about community displacement and community dispossession in the ways that you know, bring up such things as like private prisons and the ways in which we have found ways to create capital out of situations like this. I'm always I know that piece is always sort of moving, and so when I think about technology, I think about education, and the purpose, and one of the purposes of education being an access to opportunity is, do we have an economy right now where we'll have jobs for these young people to get, when we have a technology sector that is all about turning these things into sort of like cloud-based opportunities. So it's like our racially segregated class-based system of education is only a reflection of our communities, and definitely technology plays into that. And if it's any way out, it's that our values have to catch up with our technology, and we got to innovate. We need an evolution of values. We need a sort of like iOS 10. So I don't know, but I definitely agree with that statement. She sort of put it on the money for me.
So there's a question from the chat roll, like who's the they they're mining? Is that the question?
Yeah, like the corporations, or who's going through our data.
Okay, well, I mean, the people that want to sell stuff. I mean, like, really, like, to me, the easiest way to kind of explain who does the mining is if you've ever Googled something, and then you'll notice the advertising on the side of your social media is whatever you just finished looking at. So they took that, you know, and they mined that data and used that data to know, okay, if you looked at this shoe, you may want to buy that shoe. Or, like, you may start to notice when you go into a Walmart or whatever store you're shopping in, the end cap starts to look more attractive, because they know that a certain demographic of people live on a certain side of town, and if you like Starbucks and you like cookies, then you might like this toffee coffee flavored snack, and we're going to make sure it's near the front and at this eyesight. So I think, you know, everybody that has something to sell is who's benefiting and mining the information. And then just from a Google standpoint, like, what better way to know what the world is thinking than to be able to actually monitor your thinking process? Like, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, when I look at the edit history of any of my students' document, I can go back and I can actually see how they were thinking that process out. And that's like a real deep thing to do. My students are writing personal narratives, so Google pretty much knows everything about everything in a way. Even though I know it's the computers doing the reading or whatever, but I know that data is being mined to do whatever it is they want to do. But that is the world we live in, right? Like, they tap phones. They've always tapped phones. They've got security cameras everywhere. Like, we're already being watched. We're already being mined. That is the world that we live in. And so to be afraid of it is to be ruled by fear, right? So I think the challenge is to overcome that fear and learn how to navigate the world that we live in, and use the same tools that they have access to. This word subversive is weird to me because it's almost always used in a negative connotation, and I think it really depends on the perspective if it is. Like, right, like, being subversive is a way of bringing about a change that might need to happen, right? There are probably a lot of people that thought, you know, they were members of the civil rights movement that were being subversive, right? But not necessarily in a bad way. So I don't necessarily think subversive is always bad. I think what it does is it challenges whatever the powers that be. And I think currently right now our public education systems especially need some subversive individuals in the mix. Let me say it that way.
And to add on, Al, to who's trying to get the data, right? You also, it's like the private market, definitely, but also the state, right? I know in Chester, a child misses 12 days of school, like how many, I forget what the number is now, truant. That truancy is turned into a fine. That fine can be collected by the city to, you know, and so if you go back to the Department of Justice report on Ferguson, and you talk about the ways in which the community was used as especially the poor black community, was used to be able to sort of just take money and fine people to be able to garner resources to provide the revenue for the police force. I think in many ways that happens in schools. You talk about like summer school, that process, and if you talk about like tutorials and in these pieces, like it's all. I think that also the state has to be included in ways of using that data to create these sort of like capital opportunities. And some of that might be like sharing with the police force, sharing disciplinary records of children with the police force, which now turns into a, it's meant to say, hey, we can help out. We can see the connections between people who are messed up in school and trying to keep the community safe. But now that turns into a whole, you know, we're right back at the school to prison pipeline. So I don't know. The state and the private market are like all involved in this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, particularly when we get that question, who's mining the data. I mean, certainly, like Al brought up Google, and I think that's where the next claim comes from anyway. But I think that, to Chris's point, you know, there's a certain amount of data we're mining as a school system already that, you know, that says this family doesn't send their student to school, therefore troubled family. This student has this disciplinary record. You can access it before you meet him, shake his hand, and ask him what he did over the summer, you know, and things like that. So I think, you know, that's interesting in terms of like what kind of data are we collecting and what are we doing with it, and is it entrenching a system, or is it changing a system that we all want to, you know, if we're in fact subverting a system or changing a system that we all think should be changed, you know. What the heck are we doing with this data? Like, why produce the data if we're not going to do something positive with it?
But I think also, like, and I just want to talk about the data, like you got the quantitative and you got the qualitative, and I think there's a question is like, what does professional development look like in support of learning? So I think the biggest problem with education is that we have teachers teaching students, and I'll just briefly explain it. We should have students teaching students and not teaching each other. Teachers should be students. Like, in order to teach somebody how to learn, you should know how to learn. Like, you really should be sharing the techniques that you're using to acquire information. That's really what you're doing. Like, if I wanted to be a butcher, I'm going to go hang out with a butcher. If I want to be a plumber, I'm going to hang out with somebody that plumbs. And if I want to be a good student, I need to be in a room with a good student, right? And I think a lot of times teachers look at learning opportunities as one thing. Professional development, like that. Just if I don't go to a class, if I don't pay tuition, I'm not learning. And I think what technology, or people that have tried to master a technology or at least learn one, are learning. If you got onto Twitter and now you know how to use it for a purpose, you know how to teach children how to use a social media tool to get something that they want. And I think that's what's important. So I think teachers need to make sure that they are learning something, right? And then figure out how to apply those skills and those techniques of acquiring information to the students that they service, as opposed to waiting for whatever directive or narrative. So I think the professional development looks like people that continue to learn and share how they're able to learn themselves.
Joe, I had one more point about the data thing too. I started saying is like, I don't think that we need more data. What we need is more complicated storytelling, more complex storytelling, because the stories that we're telling and confirming are still very much so, you know, binary, good or bad, and we really need to change that and bring a level of like causation and a systemic approach to how we tell stories, and not just individual data, because the difference between individual data and systemic an approach.
And I think that was the whole, yeah, I agree with you, like the quantitative, qualitative, like the numbers are, you know, the quantitative. I think qualitative, when I sit down and read my students writing, like I learn so much more about them and what they're trying to say. And I love how they feel, how they interact, and how they feel thinking that they actually have something important to say, right? Like even if it's just about a soccer game, right? Or I have a student that wrote about his first touchdown. The fact that he knows that someone cares about the first time he scored a touchdown is very important data. I think.
No, So I appreciate these points. I think you've taken me to, I was going to jump to a claim about Google, but I think there's a better claim that sort of resonates with the conversation we're having now, so we'll see how I do with this screen share. I think it's going to work like a dream. So here's the next claim. So it's this: if we want schools to be democratizing, then we need to stop and consider how computers are likely to entrench the very opposite, unless we stop them.
So I wanted to just make a point about, again, I know that this piece has done exactly what it was meant to do, which is provoke dialogue and get people talking, which is great. One thing that I find that sometimes these pieces don't take into account is that for those of us on the ground in classrooms, we don't have the luxury of simply theorizing about whether computers should be in the classroom or should we kick them out totally. We are pragmatists because we are educators, and we deal with the reality that we have in front of us, and we try to make sure that we help our students. We have to have a double consciousness of helping our students succeed within a system that we know is structured by inequality, and where we know there's some really messed up stuff happening with privacy and with the forces against democracy. But we have to help them succeed within that system and agitate to change it at the same time. And that's why teachers, we don't have the luxury to sit around and just say a thought experiment of what if we got rid of all the computers, because that's not going to be happening anytime soon. And I don't think it should be happening. The idea is that we need to retake control as educators to think about what we want to do with the computers to make sure that our students are having the most transformative experiences possible. So I think if we think about what technology can offer us that nothing else in education can so far, the unique power that technology brings is the ability to connect individuals and connect groups of people across distance in ways that we never imagined before. And we need to exploit that power of connection to help students actually create authentic pieces of writing where they can share their story about their touchdown or whatever they want to say about themselves to a worldwide audience, to find people who are like them, people who are different from them, and expand their worldview. That's the democratizing power to me. And so I feel like I agree that there needs to be some very critical thinking about whether or not we just let computers roll in and become another source of a technology that kind of takes power away from teachers, or if we take the chance to actually step up and say that we're going to make this work for us. And a lot of that goes back to what we talked about earlier about professional learning. Teachers need to be treated like the professionals we are and given the chance to experiment with technology, to learn what they want to use, what they want to introduce to their students, and the chance to learn from their students, like we were talking about earlier, so that they can actually get enough comfort and familiarity that they're willing to try out the technology, because no teacher is going to want to do that if they have no clue what they're doing. They want to have time to play with it and then decide what they want to use. So I think that's what frustrates me a little bit about this article, is because I think people that want to use it as backlash to computers or as some way to stop the entire conversation, this is fuel for people to say, you know what, well then forget it. The kids in urban schools don't even need the computers because they don't matter anyway. And I think that's a very dangerous road to go down.
All right, so I'm going to riff a little bit here because I agree with so much of what folks are saying and also what Nicole just most recently said. But in regards to this latest claim and a theme in this conversation, we're really both conceptually and also very physically boxing ourselves into schools. And if we look at this quote here, if we want schools to be more democratizing, if we want schools to be democratizing, then we need to somehow change our relationship to computers and how they're used. And I would agree in Nicole's statement in a very pragmatic sense that many of the technologies that we use these days are mobile. They connect us to networks that are both globally connected but also very locally connected. And one perhaps strategy for a more democratic approach to learning is to actually begin to break down some of schooling's walls. And computers can become a very powerful tool in doing so. Not only the kind of connections through networks that allow us to connect globally, but to literally leave our schools, to literally leave the buildings, to use the phones that students bring with them to schools, to use the tablets that are often promoted in one-to-one integration programs, to begin to use data collection methods and techniques that are afforded by technology, and to begin to engage our communities, our actual communities, our neighborhoods, our parks, our city halls, our street corners, and our bodegas, wherever we may be, to use those technologies for more equitable and engaged learning, to then find a more equitable and democratic approach ultimately to schooling. But I think that physical barrier, the classroom as container, the school as a structure, is a very limiting element to how we've even conceptualized and then pragmatically use our various technologies, including computers.
Yes. I agree. I know it's weird. So I'm addicted to my phone, and I try to use my addiction for good. So when I sit at the lunch table with my students, a lot of times my students, they'll ask me what games I have on my phone, and they're amazed that I'm not playing games. And so I actually show them, the articles that I may be reading or the emails. Sometimes I'm reading their stories with Google Classroom, I'm leaving comments or whatever, but they genuinely don't know how to use a lot of the technology as tools. And so I think that's a great point, whether it's in a classroom or at the lunch table or out at a coffee shop or at a football game, if they actually see the tools being used to accomplish something other than the boring work that they have to do or what have you, then that empowers them to say, oh, wait a minute. If I can do this or if I can do that, then it's not even like learning in a school setting. It's more like, okay, here are some things that I can get better at. And I think that's kind of the way I try to present. I know, like with writing this year, whatever they start with, I don't even try to grade it until like they've worked on it for a while, because I know wherever they started, they can get better at it. And I think that's kind of the thing with technology. Whatever we're doing, I think it was a great point. Teachers need the opportunity to get some stuff that doesn't work and to learn from that, right? But we need to be learning first, and then if students see teachers learning, it encourages them to know that, what, it's okay if I make a mistake. The only way you can learn something new is to try something that you didn't already know how to do. So I think that's exactly the point. I think classrooms and schools are the box, and we need to convince students that, you can learn outside of it.
And I don't know, I'm curious to hear what Remy and Al would think. I get the feeling that sometimes in the technology discourse we get to a place that because learning and schooling are not the same, that sometimes spaces of schooling, because we do have so many constraints on us, like testing and the physical space and the curriculum to get through, that sometimes the schools get written off as places where true connected learning can take place, and people look to after-school spaces or purely online spaces as these free, amazing places of learning that the MacArthur Foundation and others want to invest in, but that schools, we just kind of have to like let that ship sink because it's just too complicated in schools, and that frustrates me because I feel like regardless of the constraints, that is the space that is the most democratizing, because the space where almost all of the students in our country, the great majority, are going to go through, and there is something valuable about having that space as a home base from which to explore the technology that's around them, to expand the classroom walls as opposed to just destroying them or assuming that they are only a space of limitation. And so I feel like for teachers, we want to see it as an empowering thing, to think that school can add something important to this technology learning, that it happening in school could actually be a benefit as opposed to a constraint. I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, no, so I'm gonna get a little academic here, but Nicole, I love where you're taking us. So we of course want schools to be a democratizing setting amongst the multiple settings that we might call a learning ecology, and some folks who really buy into and promote this connected learning model that folks like the MacArthur Foundation have funded really advocate this ecological approach, right? We're learning online, but multiple online spaces or settings. We're learning in our community, in civic settings. We're learning in school and other so-called formal settings. We certainly learn in our home and in our cultural settings. Folks also, of course, emphasize natural and environment. We have this huge ecology, and yet in terms of, I think, what I'm hearing you, Nicole, emphasize, and what I think is really critically important, is that we tend to look at the nodes in the ecology. We tend to invest in the material tools or the resources in these nodes, in school or in online or in the community, and less attention and less resource allocations, and I think actually less study, looks at the connective tissue, as some people call it, or the network, or the pathways that actually bring all of these nodes together. And so if we begin to look at it from that perspective, we have to have schools. And those schools have to be flexible, open, porous settings. And they have to ultimately be connected to this entire ecology. So I'm going to leave it there. getting a little wonky, but I'll leave it there.
No, I appreciated that whole piece about ecology, because one of the things I've been changing too in my approach is it's not I thinking of schools as institutions and trying to really reframe my mind to think about it as these sort of like cultural communities where people, ideas, and learners and teachers come together, and that side of it is the part that I enjoy more. And I think when we talk about that community part, because we even like you mentioned earlier, Nicole, like about Twitter. Twitter has nothing to do with for like the people who like why Twitter became such a democratizing space was not in the intentions or the number one priority of the CEO or the people who developed that technology. It was a community who found that tool and came together and utilized it for that purpose. And so yeah, I do think about like those like Remy's like about the pathways and the ways in which we come together and connect. And I definitely believe that schools are a very important site for that, and to be able to have these sort of like legitimized and spaces that have like its own sort of traditions and ways to be able to fund this work of community organizing is important. That's the role for me anyway when I think about learning. If it's anything that I've sort of like grown, I'm only a couple years in. I'm going to my third year. When I first started, I was the tech guy at the school, and I don't want this to get too long, but I was the tech guy at the school, and by the end of the first year, I realized what I was set up to do, and that was to like go work with teachers and let them know that the way they're teaching is obsolete and they need to change their practices. And I wasn't really about that. So by the end of the first year, I just started thinking like, I don't want to be here for technology. I want to be here for design. And then we started getting into design, and I realized like, what is the role of technology in design? And if anything, is to be able to facilitate conversations amongst people. And yeah, so now I'm at like this whole people piece, and I use way more dry erase boards than I do laptops. But I just find that to be a really interesting turnaround for me, and talking about sort of like this evolution of technology in schools, because I think when we get down to like the purpose of education and the purpose of society and our individual and communal responsibilities, it comes back to that, and it makes sense altogether.
Well, I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna say this. So this is my 20th year in the classroom, and I've figured out a different way to see if I'm smart or not. And this is what I do. I try to find people that I think are smart and how many of them I think like, right? And that's what technology does for me. Like, I'm able to find people now from around the country and the world who, you know what, I think they have good ideas. I thought something similar. And so something like today, I had a conversation with a 10-year-old, and I was just curious where she went to school in the first grade. And she told me that she didn't remember the school, and she didn't remember the name of the teacher, but she remembers that her teacher was mean. And that's kind of the most important thing to me, right, is that what she didn't remember, she didn't tell me about the lessons, she didn't tell me about the computers. She said, I remember that the teacher was mean, right? And so that's the point. The point is we have to believe that we know what our purpose is. The school has a purpose. The institution of the school has a purpose. Society at large has a purpose. But as an educator and as an individual in a classroom with 17, 18, 25, however many students, you should have a purpose, right? And whatever you think that purpose is, right, if you get to do that, you're going to be better at it. And so I think that's how technology fits into it, right? Like, my purpose is to make sure this year is to make sure that my students' writing improves and gets better and becomes the best it can be. And there are certain tools and technology that I think I can use to help make that road a little easier. And that's kind of the way I use it and how I think about using it, right? I think of my purpose first, and then I say, okay, how can I use this technology, as opposed to, you know, Apple came out with a new tablet, I've got to get one. And I think a lot of times, you know, if we look at the approach to, okay, why am I here and what am I good at, I think it becomes easier to figure out how to use that technology in a most effective way, as opposed to, you know, I got to get test scores up or whatnot. It's always should be about educating the people on the other end.
So I want to jump in with the last claim, because I really appreciate the points you guys are raising, and I think we are, you know, working our way around each claim for sure. So this protocol is proving to not be so stilted or whatever. I feel like a good free-flowing conversation. But kind of to jump back to what Chris was talking about in terms of like what he felt he was set up to do, like as the tech person in the school. I think that for me, what I take away from what you just said is there's a resonance there when I go to ISTE also. And I don't want to be too, you know, I don't want to vilify ISTE, because there's genius people who come and speak at ISTE, and you can learn things that you can't learn at other conferences. So if I paint ISTE with a broad brush, I'll just be wrong. I would say the general fetishization of technology, though, and drinking the Kool-Aid until it spills all over your T-shirt about technology can be a problem, and we can sometimes want to throw out a lot of babies with a lot of bathwater. And I think that so the last claim I want to share, I have to do my screen sharing in a second, is really about the expo hall. And so what Watters says in the article, she basically says the expo hall is a blank, like it's bad. And so you have to have some familiarity with the expo hall. So I guess my lead in with that is that if you've been to the expo hall, it's basically just vendor after vendor, and it's football fields. And the first time I went, I saw so many software vendors claiming that they, you know, that they had the silver bullet for my classroom or for my school, or, you know, the bigger the stanchion they were standing behind, they might have the solution for my whole district, right? And it has a really big price tag. And so that's what I think we're getting at with this expo hall, is if you can just imagine all the people who are trying to make money off of educational technology in America trying to sell you something, that's what we're referring to with the expo hall, even if you haven't walked through it. I think that's a fair description of it. So we'll see. But so the last claim is just that the vendor-driven spaces are terrible. So let's see if I can screen share it real quick, and then we'll move on to that part of the conversation. So, yep, there it is. So it says, the ISTE Expo Hall is a massive blank show.
Do we get to
okay,
play?
Go ahead.
I was just going to play fill in the blanks with everyone. I thought that'd be fun if we could all add one. I went almost a year ago. I went to a tech summit, one of these summits at a university setting, sponsored by an educational nonprofit, that was kind of like what you're talking about. Very slick poster presentations, everyone dressed in their startup T-shirts, that all claiming to have a grand answer for the problems that ail education, that can be done in a simple one-stop app solution. And it is very off-putting for me as a teacher. It's very strange. It's a strange environment. And I think it just gets back to the idea that we keep bringing our conversation back to the purposes of education, like Chris was saying. And I think no one wants to have that conversation because it's a very difficult, thorny conversation to have, and it takes a lot of soul searching, and it deals with our very beings. So instead, we try to come up with simple solutions that we can blast out to at scale to the entire system of public education, because it's too hard to meet every individual student's learning style. So we try to come up with these apps that are going to save the day. And I think all they do is they contribute. I've seen some of them. I wrote a blog post for DML about a year ago about different reading platforms, and the way they try to take away teacher agency by just giving canned curriculum or canned ways to simply give you more data number data about your students. And so just briefly, I would say that it's just another example of, instead of investing in the time and energy it would take to let teachers have real learning communities where they can actually explore and come up with their own strong pedagogy, it's trying to take that money and just pump it into a one-size-fits-all solution that is bound to fail, considering the diversity that we have in all of our classrooms, and from one student to another. So I think it's very dangerous to take those as true educational tools if they can't be remixed and mashed up and changed to what you need for your individual learning space.
Okay, I'm gonna take my turn to fill it in the blank, and I will put technology in the blank. Let me say this about the expo hall, right? There are real gems in there, and I think as an educator, to actually go and see everything that's offered, because I love that ISTE is multiple days long. I spend hours in the expo hall. I go up and down, and a lot of it is garbage. But there are some smaller tech startups that really have a great idea, and I think that it is a skill to be able to navigate through the minutia of it all. And that way, when you get back to school and they come to you with the next best thing, you have already seen 150,000 next best things, and you can better gauge, right? As opposed to, well, they told me this was best, so this is best. So I like the expo hall. It is a bunch of stuff, but there are some gems in the expo hall. There are some real gems in there.
All right, I'll jump in. Slightly different than the first two contributions. I'll say that the expo is a massive capitalism show, and we might replace that with another word that also begins with C, which could be culture. And certainly there is this kind of techno-determinism culture, but there's also the culture of our students. And I have to imagine that a more equitable, perhaps more democratizing allocation of time would be to imagine the many, many, many hours that a typical teacher spends in the expo hall at ISTE, or spends researching technology tools during a given year, or spends sitting in irrelevant professional development in a given year, and was able to channel those hours into speaking to their students. And as Al was saying earlier, asking them about their hobbies, asking them about their interests, asking them about their home cultures. And I wonder if we could, swap this time suck of a capitalism show with investing real time and effort and energy into connecting with the cultures and the identities and the interests of our students.
I mean, so my thing with the expo hall is, it's on some level, if I'm doing my job as an educator, right, my kids will be the ones who are selling me stuff, like, in the future. So I want to hold on to, like, that, and we think about, like, our schools prepared these people to create the software or create this app and then build this to come together for this sort of like expo. And they, like, so it's, I think less about the expo, and I think all about the ways in which those messages of this being a, prime opportunity, this being necessary, is part and parcel of every day that we go into the classroom and educate. And this is the goal of that. So that for me brings it more back home. And so it brings me back home to say, yeah, I want my kids to build things, and I want you to be able to share it in the world. But at what cost? And at what price? So when I think of the expo hall, I just think that's what we create. So it's a result of how our education system is, and I think that we need to think more about our role and how that, like, market came to be, and how that ideology flows through our curriculums, and less about people trying to make a living and sell their little things. So I tell you, a funny thing that I do, and I know we run out of time, is every time somebody calls me and it tries to like sell me. I'm a librarian, so it either tries to like sell me books or sell me some app that I really don't need. I just I really just have a conversation with them about like, what's the most I can do for you to get your job right without giving you any money? Because I want to help you keep your job. I think you need it. You know, we all need it. But we really ain't got no money to be buying those stupid apps out here.
Okay, I'm just if I could jump in for a minute, and I'm just going. This is a quick plug. So I met the founder and CEO of a little site called BookTrack. It's a free site. It's free. If you never heard of it, check it out in literacy. The long story short, students can actually create their own musical scores for their writings. And as someone is reading their writing, whatever sounds, you can have ambiance, cricket sounds, whatever sounds you want to go along with the writing. It is adjustable by speed. There's a cursor that follows the line. And it's free. And it's a way for kids to digitally publish their work. And if they want to, you can turn it into a store now they've added where they can monetize their writing. And it's a free app and a free resource for teachers. And there were some things in the expo hall where there are people in there that they know everybody's coming in there because of all the bells and whistles. There are some smaller startups. There are some people that are trying to help contribute to providing teachers with tools because they know there are thousands of teachers from all over the world. And I'm trying not to paint the expo hall with a broad brush because one of the ways that opened up my understanding to what's actually available is the expo hall at ISTE. Like, I mean, the first time I went in Atlanta and I was in the expo hall, I had no idea of what I had no idea about in technology and education. And if nothing else, it's good to kind of help you see how far out of the loop you've been, right? Not to even be a part of, it may not even be attractive, but it is a realization that, hey, these are the tech players, right? This is the world we live in. Now, whether I want to go towards it or run away from it or figure out how to navigate through it, that's the reality right now. And there are some gems in the expo hall.
Am I allowed to say something, or do we have to wrap up?
No, we don't. I'll wrap up. Let's do a last word, Nicole. So I think we should everybody do a last word if you haven't already.
No, yeah, I would just say I'll take back my earlier wholesale critique of the showrooms, and I'll say that all tools have some value. I think the issue is when the tools are presented going back to full circle to our first claim about efficacy, that these are promoted as a one-stop shop solution that takes away teacher agency. If we had a chance to do a hackathon with all the people in one of those rooms and think about the kinds of solutions that we can come up with for individual teachers and schools, that could be a really powerful space. But like we saw in our chat roll, I think Bud Hunt was chiming in, the people that get to be in these conversations are usually not classroom teachers. And the people that have to wind up spending money when money in a district is bookmarked only for technology, and then folks come along with these solutions that can just kind of be an answer to all your prayers, which is never the truth, takes money away from other things we could be doing that would actually be strengthening the pedagogical aspects of using technology in the classroom. So I just want to end by kind of giving that push that we need to take back the control as the educators and think about what we can do with powerful pedagogy that incorporates technology instead of letting it take us over.
All right, thanks. That's great. All right, last word. It's a challenge. It's a homework assignment for everybody. If you're going to ISTE in Denver this summer, I'll be there. We can walk the exhibitor hall, and we're going to take a tally. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to every single ed tech company selling a product, and we're going to ask them a yes or no question. Did your product go through a co-designed process with educators? Yes or no? Did you co-design with educators? And we'll find out how many did and how many didn't. I think that is a reflection of the engagement and a more equitable measure of how we're designing educator-friendly tools for our schools.
Well, I'll be in ISTE. Let's do it. I'm coming next year. So, yes.
My final word is, as much as I think about sort of like technology in the classroom, even like bigger than education is the way that we use technology to create community, and how we even as neighbors and as folks just in the circle. So my challenge is for educators and us to think not just about what the role of these tools in the classroom, but think about the role that they have in our neighborhoods and how we walk 24/7, 365.
All right, well, I think everybody got a last word in, and we certainly talked around the whole issue of the expo hall, and I would agree with Nicole that I probably have to back off. As I led into that, I was definitely more critical of the expo hall than some of you were, so I really appreciated just thinking around all sides of that issue, so that was kind of ending us on a good believing and doubting moment. But we are out of time, and thanks so much for this panel, because this panel's been terrific, and every time I've opened my mouth to talk, it's probably a mistake because it means one of you isn't talking. But I really appreciated all your contributions. So I want to thank you all and everybody who's been watching in the chat room, tweeting along if you tweeted along. Thank you. If you're interested in learning more about connected learning, make sure you check out the Connected Learning Alliance at clalliance.org. If you'd like to keep abreast of future opportunities from Educator Innovator and partners like the ones we heard about today, actually, we didn't hear about partners today. We just talked with good friends. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter at educatorinnovator.org and follow Educator Innovator on Twitter at @innovates_ed. So thanks, everyone. It was my pleasure to host this. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.